The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning's webinar on what's new in FME 2020. I know I've had a sneak peek at some of the slides and some really exciting stuff coming up. So it's great, the attendance list, first of all, seeing all the people that are here, some really strong FME users, so I can see some really great use cases of putting this to good work around your different organizations. With me today is obviously Gavin Park, which everybody's very familiar with. Gavin is our FME trainer, professional and server professional as well. And I also have Annie as well in the background, looking after all of our marketing, and she's going to be looking after the questions later on. We've purposely left a bit of a block for questions because there is a lot of functionality. So please don't be shy, pop in some questions. We have a lot of time allocated for it. And if you have any ideas or anything you want to pass by myself or Gavin, please don't be shy. So I'm going to hand over to Gavin, who's going to kick, and I can jump in and out as we go. Thanks, Gavin. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say those photos look slightly more clean cut than after being locked in for a week. Just one thing I was going to mention as we started. The World Tour obviously has been postponed with everything that's been going on. So the FME Lizard is taking a break for the summer, but we will be back in October on the 6th. So we're not going to do the whole virtual world tour that a couple of other sort of partners and SAFE have done. We still think it's really good to have you guys come up, actually have that interaction and things. So hopefully everything will have calmed down by October. So if you want to move the FME World Tour date to the 6th, that's probably going to be a good one. And hopefully we'll see everybody again then for that one. And I think that probably kind of underlies a lot of what SAFE have been doing around the data management part of this as well. So they've sort of come up with this quote that I think was quite timely. It kind of predated all of the COVID-19 things, but actually it just really goes to show the importance of having, the right data, understanding the right context, and having that at the right time. And obviously that's something that FME really helps with as part of your processing. I think everybody has become an expert at reading graphs, difference between a log graph and everything in the last few weeks. And obviously, again, it's just making sure that those data is good and understanding the differences between, countries like Italy versus the UK versus Ireland, Sweden and things. It's really starting to bring home the importance of some of these things. So that's really why SAFE Software and the extension FME exists, is so that organizations can really maximize the value of your data. So it's how do you take your data from that organization, from the different elements within it, and actually get the most value of it and make it relevant to the people making decisions. And I think increasingly that's where we're seeing the shift. And FME 2020 is very much around the enterprise. So, they always kind of theme the different releases each year. And I think they've realized now that they're very much at this point where they're really looking to support individuals and organizations of any real size. So whether that's, a small business, large multinational, federal government, local government and things, all those different kind of sizes of organizations, how you integrate that data across the different departments, your applications and systems. And actually that's probably one of the really key messages for the 2020 release, is this sort of integration between departments, applications and systems, and how that all actually starts to come together with it. And I must admit, when we first started looking at 2020, it was kind of like, well, actually, there's not really so many big marquee features that have come out in this release. It's normally there'll be something really big where everybody can get excited about and makes these webinars really easy. Actually, with this one, it's lots of really small changes that once you start to actually use them, make a huge difference. There's an awful lot of usability, performance, tiny little tweaks around actually helping organizations share that data. And actually, this release is going to be really strong, even though there's not possibly quite so many headline ones. Everything that's been done under the hood is really key, makes a massive difference, and actually makes 2020 a lot more powerful than any of the sort of previous versions that have gone before, especially at that kind of enterprise level. And that's kind of really underpinning this kind of move to this FME platform. So it's no longer really talking about FME as a desktop product. That kind of traditionally sat on somebody's PC, somebody's laptop, has been squirreled away in a corner. Somebody's kind of got a DVD in, translated some data and pushed that data out again. And actually it's a much broader package. It's going across, the cloud, the server kind of infrastructure, your desktop, and pushing that through as much more of an integrated platform. So, we'll still talk about FME Desktop, we'll have the server product, obviously increasingly clouds becoming more and more important, so some of the mobile aspects that are out there with FME, but actually it's much more of a sort of integrated platform that's coming together. So, the desktop product's not going to go anywhere, but the server product is getting a lot more powerful, and there's much more integration between those two applications. And then cloud is just another way of deploying server. So if you want to stand up the sort of server infrastructure, but don't want to go through your IT department, don't have a large IT infrastructure, or just want something stood up very, very quickly, and certainly these sort of uncertain times, you might need to roll something out very, very fast. That's where FME Cloud is perfect for. It's very, very quick to go in, stand something up for an emergency response, have it sat there, and then throw it away at the end of it, and you only pay for the time you need. You're not investing in large amounts of kit that you would need to have on premise and things. So it adds a lot more flexibility, but essentially it's just FME Server. And what we're starting to see is this kind of real harmonization with these products. So, we're not just working with desktop anymore or not working with server. It's this combination of the two working together and actually then getting that data across the organization. So we have kind of the authoring side now in a lot of the terminology, which very much reflects the desktop product. What they call the FME engine, which is the core kind of translation component that sits behind FME, no matter where you use it, it's that engine that does it. So the workspace will let you author it, and then the engine runs the workspaces behind the scenes for you. And obviously then we have the automation side, which is leading towards server, which is very much around how you can push out your workspaces, that data translation out to a wider audience, or just run it as a scheduled task again, or have it respond to information with kind of all the automation capabilities that are in FME. And it's really just building on what SAFE have had and what FME have had for the last, 2 decades, but it's just making it more efficient, more streamlined, and actually a lot easier to use than it probably has been in the past. So there's an awful lot of power there. And I think, if you're an organization that's not looked at FME Server before in the past, now is a great time to actually start to explore it. There's a huge amount of capability there. There's much more integration between the products. And I think, looking forward over the next 5-10 years, you can definitely see stuff moving more towards that server kind of environment. So, if you're sat there thinking about it, especially now if there's a lot more time potentially to do this, it is a great chance, have a chat with Garrett about getting access to it and things as well.
And that's a good point, Gavin, when the earlier slide around kind of having access to the right information at the right time in the right context, that's what FME Server is absolutely perfect for. So besides obviously all the standard automation stuff and the workflows that you can create, and also the basic things which is used by utilities and councils here is providing simple things like self-service portals. So to be able to stand up these FME Server apps where people can come in to a drop-down menu and ask for a particular data set and generate it themselves within seconds in whatever format they want, so it can be consumed on any device that they want. And that's really, really important, especially I know from speaking to all the different councils and utilities at the moment, everybody is just under so much pressure to roll out all these new applications, whether it's Teams or SharePoint or whatever it may be, to automate your day-to-day GIS tasks and data requests. FME Server and FME Cloud are absolutely perfect for that. So once you already have your workspace, it can literally just be published up, turned into a server app, and someone can literally just from a drop-down menu say, I want this data set in this coordinate system, in this format, okay, and within seconds they have it on their own machine. Instead of your inbox filling up with requests from people, and then you go back to them and give them the data, and it's like, I needed that 2 weeks ago, I need a fresh cut, etc. So it's a really, really powerful tool for stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, I think, it's minutes to stand the server apps up. And I say we'll touch on them as we go through because there are some enhancements. If you've not seen them, it's a great chance to have a look at them. But they are hugely powerful. They are very, very simple to stand up, but you can get an awful lot of power behind them as well. So you can put something up very, very quickly, or actually you can build something that's quite complicated that sits behind them off the back of it. So it's really kind of up to you and your business processes. So there are very quick wins there, and there's also some quite powerful stuff in there as well. But obviously with FME now, we're talking about that cloud deployment. You can still have it on premise, of course. Most customers will run on-prem. They'll put some elements into the cloud, and we're starting to see a slow transition to more and more users picking this up. But obviously, as more and more cloud systems come available, aren't just online. There's some enterprise kind of technologies out there. that you can deploy into these environments. More and more things are starting to move into that space. And there's also the marketplaces, so you'll be able to get FME Server specifically from some of the marketplaces in the future. And these are these kind of online cloud warehouses where you just go, oh, I want this application, and it stands it up there for you. So there's some sort of slow moves into those areas. And you've got flexibility around your deployment environments. So, it's always had the Windows support in there. There's Mac support for the desktop. There's Linux support. Desktop's there, but mostly it's on the server side. So if you're standing up Linux servers for sort of web infrastructure and things, you can run FME Server on there. And then there's the sort of newer, more Gucci ones, things like Docker and Kubernetes for server, and they're just about scale. So they're just about taking FME Server, putting it into a large organization's IT infrastructure, and then rolling that out at massive scale. So if you're wanting, hundreds of engines, you can use Docker and Kubernetes and things to scale up very, very quickly to build these scalable applications. And essentially, if you've never come across that terminology, just think Netflix. It's basically the kind of thing that Netflix does to scale out behind the scenes to deliver you content. It's all that shiny IT stuff that takes place behind the scenes that's just very, very flexible. And obviously, there's still FME Cloud on there, which currently is on AWS. There are some moves onto things like Azure and the Google platforms going forwards as well. There's also some tweaks to the release schedule this year. SAFE have typically moved to about 4 releases roughly per year, though it's typically tended to more be closer to the 3. So they're moving to a spring release, which is obviously what we've just had for the 2020 release. There'll be a .1 release that's going to come out sometime in the summer. Quite when that's going to be, it would probably have been around August time this year. Hopefully they will still stick to that. Obviously their World Tour has been cancelled as well, so that slightly shuffles the time frames. And there's normally a full release as well. Generally, if you're on desktop, it's quite easy to pick up all of these. The idea is that they will try and get as much new functionality into each release, so they're not waiting for an end of year with stuff just sat on the shelf. They will push it into the product. So they might not talk about it as much, but functionality will drop into that .1, .2, and they might pick it up again next year. It's more of a published thing, but the capability will be there. Certainly, if you're looking for server, I would definitely look around that .1 release. That's always a good one to go to because it's just a little bit more stable and it's a bit more bedded in.
That's what I was going to ask. So I suppose 3 upgrades would be quite a lot, or some of them just think of some of our utilities. So if you were to kind of advise customers on one update, would you go with the .1? I know I would personally, just from my own recommendations and speaking with people.
Yeah, I think SAFE's releases are always pretty strong. So from, normally people go, oh, we'll always take the .1 release because the bugs have been ironed out and things. Yeah. To be fair to SAFE, they're generally all strong releases. The .1 just tends to have the most functionality because that just tends to line up in their cycle a little bit better, I think. So, the 20.0 release tends to be the sort of, oh, we've updated the splash screens, lots of marketing, it's sort of ready for their world tour. Yeah. .1 tends to be, actually, we've been out, we've had the world tour and all the stuff that they were hoping to get in, or maybe just gone at the last minute for the world tour, so they can stand up and talk about it. Tends to fall into that release. So that .1 always tends to probably be the most rich release. It's probably the most stable, to be fair. So yeah, we'd always kind of pitch that as probably being the better one to choose.
Well, there's a top tip for everybody. We'll aim for the top, the .1 in summer. Thanks, Gavin.
So just in terms of some of the things that are new with the workspace authoring, so that's kind of really sits around the desktop, but also it ties into this engine. So what most people see as FME Desktop is actually just the engine running under the hood. So that's kind of just some of the terminology they're starting to move to, but essentially it's just desktop. So the shapefile and Excel readers have had quite an upgrade recently. The statistics calculator transformer we'll come on to a bit, has had a lot of work done to it. There's some definite performance improvements there. Same with the buffer transformer. The 3D data inspector as well has had some frame rate improvements, so it's now a little bit smoother. If you ever used it before in the past in 3D mode, it's fine, but it was always a little bit clunky performance-wise. It's basically been on a little bit of a performance kick, so it's now a lot smoother. So especially when you have larger 3D models. So as we're moving more into kind of Revit type environments, BIM data sets and things, it's now a lot quicker, a lot smoother actually just looking around those data sets as well. So, it's a minor thing, but it just makes using the workspace a lot easier. And that's both Data Inspector standalone, but also the visual preview as well. It's the same rendering technology. So it works in both. There's new style lines. We can change the color of the styles and things. So we'll come on to a bit more of an example of that. So we'll come back to the statistics calculator. And also if you're using things like Utility Network, ArcGIS Pro, for example, there's sort of better connectivity with features and things in there as well. So it works a little bit better. There's more readers and writers this year. So we'll come back onto some of these as we go through in a bit. Google BigQuery's gone in there. There's a new entwined point tile reader, Mapbox vector tile writers. So that's vector map tiles for the web. So if you think of the map tiles that sit behind things like Google Maps, Bing Maps, a lot of these are now being delivered in this vector tile format rather than as a raster imagery because they're more performant. So you can actually create these map tiles that you can then store, put on the web, and then publish into those kind of online map environments. There's a new Proj transformer. Everybody loves a coordinate system. So there's a whole new raft of coordinates capability coming in that basically build on the Proj 6 libraries. So it's a very powerful transformer. It's going to be quite a useful transformer, I think, for doing lots of different coordinate projection system transformations. But again, it's just coordinate systems. So it's one of those ones that drives everybody nuts, but it is really useful. So it's quite handy. Nifty is a brain scanning imagery reader writer. So again, probably slightly limited unless you're in the medical sector. But if you want to scan your brain and things, then perfect one for that one. There's the Microsoft Direct Draw, which is actually tying into some of Esri's online capabilities. So some of their new 3D sort of city viewer type technology requires this DDS capability. So they're using that. And CityJSON is a modification of CityGML. So it's the idea of being able to store large amounts of 3D data for your city at different scales, but store it in a format that's slightly more user-friendly than GML, because that tends to get interesting quickly. And then we've also got the ECW one, which we'll come back to shortly. And again, there's connectivity out into a lot more of the machine learning and computer vision type ones as well. So there's more connectors for Google AI, Azure AI, Amazon, and some of the open source AI connectors as well. So we'll just come back to that in a bit as well. And then Revit is also driving a lot of customer requirements at the moment as well. There's a lot of interest in that sort of BIM space. There's a lot of improvement around Revit support and the ability to read Revit models into FME. So with the Data Inspector, we can now just literally choose the Revit reader, add the Revit model. It comes in, we get the nice two-dimensional view, which looks very weird and wonderful. But when you can flip that into the 3D view, you can start to see all the 3D objects, and we can spin around and start to understand it. And of course, obviously on the left, we have the kind of table of contents, so you can start to see all the different layers that are being exposed within that Revit model that we can start to drill into. So, we can toggle stuff on and off just in the visual view, but obviously within Workbench, we can start to interact with this data. So we can filter out what the furniture is going to be, where the planting things are, and actually start to interrogate all the different elements in the model. And obviously that has all the attribute information as well that sits between it. And we've also got the option to read it as surfaces, but I can also start to pull out the floor plans if the model has them. So within that, we can now start to read the floor plan view as well. And we can also, as I discovered, find out the different floor plan levels. So we've got level 1, level 2. If you don't choose one, it brings them all in together, which is just a little bit more confusing. But obviously we can start to then break that down by the different levels. So I can say, well, actually, I only want to look at level 2, I have information about level 3 and things. So we can start to drill into these models in a lot more detail than we have previously, and it's all native. So as soon as you have the RPT kind of export file from the Revit environment, we can bring it in, and then we can translate this into anything that we want. So we can take it into, an Esri 3D environment, we can take that into a CAD environment and things, and vice versa. So again, we can interact with all the information that's there. And FME is even faster than ever. So we've always wanted FME to be faster with every release. There was a slight blip around 2017 where they didn't quite make it, but they've definitely gone back, looked at it, and a lot of the changes they were making then are actually starting to be realized now. So things like the statistics calculator, we're doing some quick tests, and it was taking just over 21 seconds in FME 2019.2. With FME 2020, that's gone down to 4.3 seconds. That's a relatively small data set, but that's still a huge saving. And if you start to scale that up to larger data sets, or if you've got lots of statistics calculators within a workspace, if you're doing a lot of reporting, you might have a lot of these stats calculators. Yeah, that's adding up to quite a considerable time saving. There's also a new, simpler interface, so it's kind of been reworked. So you can come through. It's a little bit different to the old one, but actually it's a lot easier to use once you start playing around with it. So, you know, this one, we're just taking off the min, the max prices, the total count, so you can just now tick through. You haven't got to worry about typing values in, removing them and things. It just makes it a little bit simpler to use. You might also have noticed that the cumulative port has disappeared again. So they've moved that out, and it's now an advanced option. I've never found anybody using it in the wild. If anybody has ever had a good use case, please do let me know, because I would love to see one. It's quite a powerful bit of functionality, but again, it was just never very used. So they've just simplified it, hidden it away, and it's still there if you need it, but it's just not kind of getting in the way. It's not cluttering up the workspace. And as part of this, you'll quite often hear us talk about bulk mode. And what they've done is they've changed the way that FME plumbs the data through a workspace. And essentially, it just means it's quicker, so that it can read all of a CSV file, for example. You know, it's not having to break down to the individual records if it's moving things through, doing an attribute rename and pushing data out. So some of the transformers support it, some don't. They've been slowly migrating them through, and you can see in that example there, it was taking about 9 seconds to run the data through in 2018. By FME 2020, it's literally done. So that whole workspace takes now about 1.4 seconds. So you've shaved off a good 5-6 seconds from just that part of the workflow. So again, moving to these new bulk mode support transformers just makes everything a lot quicker and a lot more performant. And the shapefile reader itself had some kind of TLC on it, so it is new, it's been reworked. What's interesting is that previously it's never really had a lot of parameters to worry about. This new version does have a few more that we can tweak that are quite useful. So we can look at trimming off some of the preceding spaces there. And we can also now change how we handle blank fields. So we no longer have to say if a blank field is missing, we can actually now say it's null. So if we know that the data might not have been populated, because the survey file doesn't really support the value of null itself, we can actually say, well, if it's not there, then we're essentially saying it is null for when we want to write it into a database, for example. So we can say, well, if it's blank, we're just going to make sure it's explicitly null. And we can also look at the handling of the numeric attribute types as well, which is that little bit at the top. And essentially all that means is that I can say now, rather than just being coming in as long or a double, I can actually say that my object ID is a number and it has a width of 10. My length is a 24 number with a 15 precision. So I can be a little bit more explicit about the data coming through, so I can understand what sizes of data are coming in, so that when I'm writing my downstream schema or working with data, I know roughly what I'm going to get as I'm bringing that data set through. There are some new formats that have gone in. First one's probably ECW. It's not necessarily a new format, but what is new is ECW v3 support. So if especially if you're one of our Hexagon customers as well, who are using a lot of the Hexagon portfolio, they obviously create the ECWs, certainly with Erdas Imagine and things, GeoMedia. You can create these ECWs, and they are really, really powerful when it comes to storing large amounts of imagery in a very small amount of space, and actually be really performant when you drill down and view them. It's a very, very efficient format. So you haven't got to worry about building pyramids or anything else you'd have to do with a GeoTIFF. You know, it's all baked into the ECW. The downside's always been that it's never had transparency support. So the V3 introduced transparency support. So now FME will actually let you start to generate not only these V3 files, but also start to build in that transparency, so that where we've got these jagged edges around this imagery, rather than it just being a big black box, you know, we can mask that out so we can actually see what's going on behind. So it's just a little bit of a performance tweak, just makes it a little bit easier to use. It's a bit more user friendly, and obviously supports, you know, both the reading of ECW v3 that are coming from any of the other Hexagon portfolio, and also writing it out if we need to push that data back out again through.
And it's worth mentioning quickly, a lot of customers that would buy their own imagery from the likes of Blue Sky and things like that, again, they'd use FME to create the ECWs, and then you can buy a plugin for Archist Desktop or Archist Online from Hexagon that lets you then consume that as well. So not just for Hexagon customers, it's quite popular on both sides of the house, which is great.
Yeah, and I say it's really good for things like ArcMap, ArcGIS Pro. You haven't got to build the primitives; they're just there. Even backing into QGIS, it's very, very performant. So it's a great format for imagery.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. So the other one that's been floating around is TopoJSON, and if you've never come across this, but remember the old ArcInfo coverages from way, way back in the day, it's a very similar concept. So the idea is if we've got these districts within Dublin, if we store that as a shapefile or most sort of GIS formats, they're individual objects, so we're sharing the lines twice. So every boundary here is effectively stored twice within the data set. The idea with the TopoJSON is that it removes those shared boundaries and only stores one copy with a reference that that line forms, the boundaries for 2 polygons or more polygons, however many are there. And it just means the data is more efficient. So with the size comparison, we've got GeoJSON on the left there, and you can see at the bottom that's about 241 kilobytes, whereas with the TopoJSON that's gone down to 115. And the reason it's come back to being important again is because if we're pushing more and more data to web environments, if your web client supports TopoJSON, that file becomes a lot smaller to send up. So it's become a lot more efficient. It's going to be a lot easier to use within the browser and environments and things as well. So it's just a nicer format for those sorts of ones to use. And it also starts to help with getting data not overlapping and things as well as part of the process. It does something weird and wonderful with the coordinates. So even though you can see on the left, we've got quite long amounts of precision, and on the right, it's all just short numbers. We haven't actually lost anything. It does still store that precision behind the scenes. It's just the way it encodes the data and does clever stuff. But it's just a nice, clean format for building it. And you've also seen there's a lot more connection to enterprise cloud data. And certainly as more and more information moves up to the cloud, the enterprise cloud products are becoming more and more useful. So you'll also have probably seen that IMGS has Snowflake as one of our partners on sort of the big data side of the business. And SAFE have now got support for that Snowflake database in the cloud. And I have to admit, this is becoming one of my favorite formats. I've been really impressed with just how simple and how quick it is to start to use this as part of our data processing things as well. So we had a very quick demo of just trying to build something together just to see how well it would work. So I thought, well, I'm going to really test this just to see if it's as good as the sales guys keep telling me. So I went and found a data set that's got about 25.1 million rows in it and thought, right, I'm just going to write that up there. So, literally just added the reader, added the data set. It's a simple CSV file, pointed it to the database, hit go, and then, it took about 1 hour and 41 minutes to push that up, which is not terrible by any means, but that's over a home broadband connection with a relatively slow uplink with all the kids on Netflix and stuff at the same time, along with everybody else working from home. So that's quite a challenging environment, and it's still got that data up there without any problems in a relatively short period of time that would still be similar to what it would take to write an internal database as well. And it's one thing I want to do is now see what
I know, sorry to interrupt. I was just saying, I know a customer that has 45 million rows of data, and like that, they were just using SQL pushing in, and that process can take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. So that individual runs the process, then does their daily job, and then it won't be till that evening or that night when it kicks in, and they have to come back then the next day and they start to work. So again, we were able to show at Snowflake how quick we could push it up there, and literally within, as you can see there, less than, actually, I think we did it in 2 hours and 4, I think maybe 3 hours, actually, I think it was. That same process. Again, in terms of the right data, right time, right context, again, if you want to get that information, get that insights, in today's world, to be running a workspace and then waiting nearly a day before you actually get the answers you need to get back to the organization is ridiculous. And that's where a great place that Snowflake can come in.
Yeah, and the one thing that need to try is to actually put this on FME Cloud, because FME Cloud sits up on Amazon. The Snowflake database is up in the cloud as well. There's going to be very, very good bandwidth. I would expect that if we ran the same workspace in that environment, that time will come down massively because they have the bandwidth to shift between it, which is substantially more than home broadband ADSL uplink is going to be. So actually we can do this a lot quicker. And one of the advantages of cloud is that everything sits out there and move it, and that's one of the big win themes for it. So again, that number can come down more. But the key thing, and it goes back to the point Garrett was making earlier, is we can come in and we can start to actually build these apps to quickly start to analyze that data. And in this case, it's a simple price paid, so it's house pricing. So we can come in, we can select a location. I can put a push pin down in one of these new web apps that Safe have created, click through, hit confirm. I've got a location, it's a buffer, so it's going to find me all the house pricing within 100 meters of that location. It will run and it streams me that report straight back. And that's just an FME workspace, querying that cloud database, getting that analytics, and then pushing it back. So, and then we've just done a really simple HTML report on the front end just to start to show that data. But you can see, it's not a trivial amount of data. There's a reasonably large amount of information behind there that we're being able to pull back, in seconds, really, as part of that query. And actually, we've not had to do any indexing. I've not worried about what index fields that was going to be, what building a spatial index or anything. I literally loaded the data, put an SQL executor against it and said, give me some information back. And it returned it back within seconds. So that's a huge saving in time and effort from a data management point of view, because I'm not worrying about, did I index that field? Did I index the right type? Did I index these fields? It's literally just running it and going. So it's very, very quick to get a workflow up that we can then stick into another process or just into an FME Server app. So in this case, we've got that first SQL executor makes a postcode query. There's about 1.5 million postcodes. It comes back, tells me, well, actually from that point location, I've got 4 postcodes. I then send that to a second SQL executor, which then actually queries that 25 million rows and pulls all that information back. And it does all that combined in about a second or 2 seconds against that data set and things, and brings it back through. So it's very, very fast with no effort at all. And alongside of that, then we've got the SQL query then. So we can use the SQL reader, we can use the SQL writer, the Snowflake reader, the Snowflake writers, for example, or we can just make the SQL queries using the SQL executor and the SQL creator as well. So again, it's a straightforward SQL statement that you'd build anywhere else for any other database system. It's against that cloud platform, and it's blisteringly quick. And the other nice thing we can start to do now with the coloring of the workspaces is here I've got a workflow that says, well, actually, if I don't find any postcodes within a particular buffer distance, I just want to handle that. So I can actually start to make that stand out a little bit more in the workflow. So here I'm just coloring up the lines to go with the colored bookmark to say, well, actually, this particular section, is going to do this, or it's going to be error trapping. So I can just use that little bit of color within my workspace now just to make things visually stand out when I'm authoring it. So you can start to quickly see the different elements within a workflow. And I think the color stuff's going to be interesting to see how people pick it up. I would say be subtle with it. I think it's going to be easy to make lots of colors and it'd be very, very, very confusing. But I think used right, like with the bookmarks and all the annotation, it's going to be a really powerful tool for actually helping people lay workspaces out and things. And if you've ever been on one of my training courses, you'll know I'm probably quite passionate about that. So just on the server side, there's been a lot of changes as well on the server side, or improvements on the server side. And obviously that's server on-prem, or that's server on the cloud as well as part of that. So there's new automations and some new better design patterns that we'll go on to have a look at a little bit more detail. There's improvements to the server apps. So server apps obviously came in with FME 2019. They're really, really powerful, but they were lacking in a couple of areas. And things like geometry, authentication, and things have all now been addressed, which we'll come back on to shortly. And the web UI, again, has been changed. I think Safe do this every couple of releases just to keep everybody on their toes. It's nicer. It's not a massive change. It does work. And there's enhanced security and things around the platform as well. So again, there's things like password expiry times and things just to kind of improve the general security. So just in terms of that UI improvement, the style on the left was what FME 2019 looked like. And then we've got that on the right, which just tidied everything up. There's slightly more logical groupings of things as well as part of that process. So if we run through, when you go through the workspace, we've still got the run the workspace, we've got automations where notifications has moved into. So all of that classic notifications capability is now moved up into that automations grouping. Schedules are still there. You can do them through automations. They're better through automations, but they're still there to use them if you want to. Jobs now has had dashboards moved into it as well. Workspaces are there so we can view, manage our workspaces, and this enhancements will come onto them. And server apps, again, obviously there. Projects are useful. They're just all being grouped together. And then files and connections just groups all of the data, web, and resources into a more logical location. So it's everything that you would have had in 2019. It's just in a slightly neater structure and things as part of that process. And the new broadcast messages is hidden under there with system configuration and also version controls in there. And if you've not tried version control in FME Server, it's definitely worth a look. It's very, very useful for understanding how your workspaces are changing and things as part of that. So it's a refinement of what it's there, and it's, I do quite like it. And then there's new broadcast messages. So one thing you can do now with FME Server 2020 is actually just put up a message on screen to users who log in. So if they log into something, they'll get that warning message. So they're really easy to create. You just go into system configuration, down to the broadcast messages, and then we can create new messages. So, give the message a name. So in this case, we're going to say, well, actually, we're going to upgrade the server. So here we can put a notification up now to warn users when they're logging in that you can see it. And I think, especially as you start to move to an increasingly wider audience with an organization, typically before it's been one or two people maybe who knew what was going on with the server would access it. But as that's rolled out to wider groups of people within an organization, actually communicating some of these things becomes more difficult. People don't read emails, they don't look at Teams messages and stuff. So by putting these messages up now, it just gives an easy way to start to notify users that when they come in, that they can see them. And we can do things like add a heading to it. We can make them bold. So it's all the kind of markdown text that you can use elsewhere in FME, you can use within here as well. There is a slight quirk that if you miss the space at the end of a word or add an extra space, it doesn't quite line everything up. So again, just make sure that you've only got the word highlighted when you select the bold and things. And then we can set the severity. So in this case, I've set that as a critical one. So when you go through to FME Server, it just gives you a nice big red message. Info is something like a green one, and then the warn is just like a yellow. So it's like a standard set of colors that you can push through. So again, it's a simple tweak, but it's just a useful way of being able to communicate messages out to a wider user base, and certainly things like downtime's an easy one to use it for. The other thing we can now do is you can upload a workspace via FME itself, FME Server itself. You no longer have to go through FME Workbench to do that. Previously, you've always had to use the desktop tool to publish to server. With this release, you no longer are tied to that. The only note of caution is it doesn't upload web connections, database connections, or any data that goes with it. So if you've got a workspace that needs any of those, you should still really go through the desktop tool to publish them for now. That may change in the future, but certainly at this release, you want to still go through desktop. But it's useful once you have workspaces that have those connections already established on there, and you just want to make a change, you've got another one you need to publish, you have that option now to upload them there through that route as well. So again, it's just a case of coming under workspaces. We can come under manage workspace and then just upload. And you can find a workspace. Mine disappears off the top of my screen. Again, it's the same kind of wizard you'd work through. So we can go through the repository name, we can find the repository we want to go to, give the workspace a name, and just hit upload, and it will upload it to the workspace. I can also commit to version control if I've got that on. So I can make a comment to say, well, that's my initial deployment of this particular workspace, or I've changed this or that to it. And I can choose the services that I want as well now. So previously, you would always only have to be able to do this through just the desktop. In here, I can come through and actually now do it on the server. And actually what's probably more useful is that I can now go into the server, I can find a workspace that's already been published, and I can actually change what work services are connected to it. which is really handy because if you're like me and forget to turn the right one on, or suddenly decide, well, actually, I don't want it to be a streaming service, I want it to be a download service, you don't have to go back to the desktop, go through the publication wizard, change it at the end and republish it. You can just come in like that, quickly change it, and it'll just flip over and add it to those additional services. So it's a small thing, but it's a really, really good usability addition as part of that. And then we've already spoken about the server apps. I think obviously using them. So if you've not seen them before, they're literally just an app that sits onto a front end of a workspace. So in this case, we've got 2 published parameters that we'd have created in the workspace that would let you choose the different values. So in this case, we've got county and categories. So we'd have those 2 published parameters in the workspace, publish it up to server, and then you just tell it you want to create a web app. And then we can run that and it will generate the data and it gives me that report. So it basically means a user who doesn't know anything about FME can come in and start querying the workspace, is getting information back. You know, they don't really ever have to worry about the fact they're using FME or FME Server. You know, somebody who understands the process creates the workspace, creates the published parameters, and just publishes it up. So once you've published your workspace, it takes about a minute or 2 minutes to create these web apps. They're very, very quick. One of the things for 2020 is you can now set them to run immediately. So previously, if you had one that was just a very simple workspace and didn't really need the user to choose anything, so it might be you've got a report that you want run, so you publish the link up onto your intranet, you know, the user would have to click through to get it to run. Now you've got under the customize option there, the run immediately option at the bottom. And essentially it just means you can push a URL into your browser and it runs the app straight away, and then we'll return them the data. So in this case, it's just returning me a download. I can then go away and open into Google Earth. It could be a straight HTML report. So this is just earthquakes. It's a simple earthquakes feed, but you know, you publish that URL up and then you can click through and then you can access that one as part of your process. The other part was location. So previously, location's always been a bit tricky to push in. You know, it'd have to be an X and Y column and things, or users would then have to create it. So you create an X and Y published parameter that would surface itself like on the right there. There's the X and Y value the user has to type in. You know, that's always a bit of a pain. It's not the easiest to use. So there's now a new geometry parameter. So if you go into FME Desktop, create a published parameter, you'll see there's a new geometry option. When you go into its configuration, you get to choose whether you want it to be a polygon, box, line, or a point, which is basically what you want the user to draw on screen. And then you have a map bounds, which are in latitude and longitude. So you just specify the bounds of your map, which is basically where it will zoom to when it clicks through and the user integrates with it. And then you'll be able to see that on the web app. So if we go into run a workspace here, we can choose a particular repository we want to go to, and you'll see we've got this new sort of green map icon at the end here that you can click onto, and then that will let you choose what you want the map to look like. So in this case, we're just going to create a quick server app. So again, we just give it a name. If I can ever learn to type, then we can put in a description around it. And again, the description just comes up within the app. So it's useful for putting instructions in there. You know, you can put a little bit of guidance to users. It uses markup as well behind the scenes. So you can actually be reasonably sophisticated about what you put in there. And then when this one was critically, if we go into the parameters, we now have the option to manage the map. So we can come into the map option here, just click on it. And at this point, it just uses OpenStreetMap by default. So we can change kind of the bounding box to it. We can zoom in. I put just a default push pin in here so that if the workspace runs and the user doesn't choose anything, it has a default. You don't have to, you can leave that blank and you can just click through, choose a location and set the new default for it. So it might be you want to have a default polygon that's really small. So if a user runs it, it's only ever going to extract a small area. The base map is based on WMTS. So if you have a different WMTS tile server, you can change that background map. So if you have your Prime 2 as a WMTS service, you can push that in as a background layer as well. And again, we just click through, jump onto that link there, and now we've got the app we can go into. We can select our map and things on there. You'll see we've got the Google base map coming through. The user can now just go in and choose their location. So this might be where you want to set your X and Y. So I want to find out all the housing stock around that particular location. Within 100 meters of it as an Excel document. You just click run and it will come through. And this will end up. So it's a very easy way to start to build up spatial queries as well now, sort of the non-spatial side of them. So
that's amazing, Gavin. Brilliant.
You still click through on the link to get the map, which is a little bit tricky. It'd be nice if the map was probably a little bit more permanent. So again, if people think that as well, do let us know, because we can push that back to save. It's just at the moment they've chosen it as kind of being that little pop-up map dialog box. But I think that's certainly going to evolve probably over the next few releases as well. So definitely watch that space. And then probably the other big one that everybody's been asking for is authentication. So server apps now will be authenticated. So if you're not logged in or don't logged in as the right user, you'll get that security challenge there on the right that you can click through and bring the information in. And again, it's really easy to set up. You just go into your app. At the bottom there, you've got that authentication. You just choose the users. So it's from the FME user list. Now, obviously, if you've got yours set up against Active Directory, that will inherit all of your Active Directory users and groups. So obviously, you'll get that through. And then if I log out of this instance now, I'll open a new tab up and paste in that link to that web app. What I'll get is that security challenge just to log in now. So again, it just makes the apps that little bit more secure. So I think that's probably the one thing that everybody asked as soon as they use them was, well, how do I make them secure? And obviously now that's something you can do with them. So it just makes it a little bit simpler as part of that process. And then the other kind of part of Server that's had a lot of work on it for this release is the automation side of it. And automations are kind of building on what was always there. So if anybody's ever looked at the old notifications within FME, it's essentially the same kind of concept, but just a lot easier to use. 2019 introduced the automations, and then 2020 is just making them more powerful. So if you've ever built a solution around notifications, you'll probably know they're a nightmare to remember where bits are, you know, what topic links to what publication, to what subscription. You know, automations made that all go away. So 2019 just really delivered the orchestration part of it. So it was probably the initial steps to making it very simple to run a workspace. So it'd be a case of, well, I want a schedule to run, and then I want this workspace to run, these two workspaces to run, merge the results, and then push them out. So it was a lot simpler to link everything together, certainly than the classic ones, but it was not as powerful as it could be. So with 2020, it's really about delivering more event-driven integration and actually being able to start to maximize, you know, the way you use the engines to make things more efficient, and actually building smaller, more focused workspaces that can run within these kind of automation environments and things as part of that. And it's probably a slight shift in thinking for FME, where, you know, they've always probably encouraged you to build bigger workspaces to get more data through. But actually now it's a case of, well, we can be a lot more sort of microserviced about it. And, you know, just literally in the last week and a half, I've found 4 different implementations that we've had previously running that are a nightmare to manage, because they're using that classic kind of notification environment. You know, they're running 20 different workspaces, and they become a real nightmare to maintain and manage. If they were an automation, it would be so much simpler. You know, there'd be one high-level view of what's going on and things. So these really are very useful. So for example, you know, we've got a number of solutions for customers where they're just doing simple map portal data ordering type workflows, and there's quite a complicated notifications kind of process sitting behind them. All of that can be replaced now with these automations. So in this case, you know, it's that same sort of web app. We can draw a bounding box polygon, push that into a workflow, but that'll actually now end up into this FME server topic here, which then triggers the rest of the workflow. So that will then go into a workspace that looks at the order processing. And then what we've got coming out of them now is these new additional ports. So rather than it being a simple pass-fail, I can say, well, actually, if there's any errors in that process, I can pull those out and send them, in this case, just to a simple log. It might be to some additional processing. might be to an email workflow that sends them back to a user. I'm extracting my order ID. I'm sending that into this PDF application here. And now I've got 3 ports. So I can say if there are no network covering that particular location I've just drawn, I can have a workflow that just sends a simple email back to them to say, well, I'm sorry, there's no network here, don't need to worry. If we do have a network, I can then send my data off to this email one that will create or send the PDF off to be emailed back to the user. And again, if there's any processing errors, I can track those and log them. And also, if there is still a workspace fail, I can still hook those up and then can push those into that kind of recording workflow at the top there. So that will send the system administrator an email to say this particular workspace crashed or didn't complete and things. So it starts to give us a real degree of detail about being able to send messages around these workflows. And this is a relatively straightforward process. As soon as we start to get larger workflows, we've got maybe 20 different workspaces being triggered. Again, it just gives us a lot more detail we can work with. And those server ports are now tied to these new server writer. So there's a new FME server writer that's been introduced. And that basically gives you these output feature types. And those output feature types map to those ports within the automation. So the data you send to, PDF map will come out of that PDF map port there. The one that goes through no network data goes through the no network data and part of that process. Again, it just makes things a little bit more simpler. There's also webhooks. So we've probably heard us talk about these before. They're Garrett's favorite subjects. They're just a way of being able to push information into a workflow. So one of the key things for 2020 is that there's a new automations webhook trigger. So we can actually now trigger a process within an automation rather than having to write a workflow to actually pick them up or a workspace to listen to them. So you might have seen before, we've looked at how we can link survey 123 into those webhooks. So, we can build a simple survey 123 app. We go through, collect the information, and when you submit it on Arc Survey, you have the option to set a webhook, and it basically then sends a JSON message back to wherever that webhook has been set up. Obviously, we can set that up to be FME Server. We can push the information back in, and then we can have a workspace respond to that particular part of that workflow or to that information. So it might be, we're only interested in critical defects coming through, and we want a workflow for critical defects. We have FME pick up the information, parse it, and then build the workflow through. So in this case, it was just sending one, and then FME would send us an email back to say that we've got this particular location that's come through, and it should hopefully send us an email eventually. So yeah, we've got an email that comes through. We can then open up. And when we've built that one before, it was basically having to build a workspace to pull all that information through, to line it all up, publish that workspace, then build the workflow. With 2020, we literally just add a webhook into the automation and then build out through the rest of our process. So our webhook pulls the information in, we're pulling out the global ID, we're sending that then down to another workspace that reads the AGOL connection, finds the information, generates the email, and then sends us off the email. So it's an easy way to start to build up these kind of more complicated workflows and things. And the webhook's just a really fast way of building those connections. So, if you're using Survey 123 or just want to get information into FME, then they're a good place to start now within there. And so lastly is, you'll see that 2020 has had a lot of transformers around computer vision. So essentially it's kind of machine learning and things off the back of it. So it's how do we pull, all of the imagery kind of size in, run them through machine learning algorithms and then push them out. So, I think a lot of people were asking in the last year, 18 months, if it could be done. SAFE went away, they spent a lot of time and actually come back with some reasonably neat solutions. So that's where these new transformers that have come in, there's a raster object detector and things that now link into some of these processes. So you can use it in 2 cases. So you can basically look at all of the data sets, use FME to create that training data, which then generates kind of the XML file that goes into your output. And then you can also use FME to run that process. So you can push it through, you can use FME to call out to these sort of computer vision algorithms or the processes. And obviously then you end up with your rectangular output. So in this case, it's trying to detect buildings and things as part of that. So they've been running it for looking for cars, for example, in car parks. So it's always the classic Black Friday sale, how many cars were parked in a particular car park in a particular shopping centre, and therefore that's an estimate of footfall and things of it. And you'll see it's using this new raster object detector that's been introduced as part of this. Now, I would still say that, you know, it makes a great demo if you get very excited about it. The whole machine learning, computer vision, creating the training data sets is still a lot of work. It's not as simple as just grabbing a couple of transformers, popping it into a workspace and getting an answer out. It's reasonably difficult to actually get a decent answer out because a lot of it's about getting the right training data and things. So FME certainly helps the process. It makes it a lot easier, makes it a lot easier to automate and to come up with a good set of training data and a good workflow process, but it's not necessarily going to be as simple as just chucking some transformers in, hitting go and getting out some sort of nice, simple results at the other end. It's getting there, but the whole concept of computer vision is still very early days, I think. So again, they've got roof detection. They've been trying it with obliques as well, looking for whether or not you can find cars in oblique imagery and things. So you've got connectors to OpenCV, which is kind of the open source one via the raster object detector. There's also links to the Google Vision. There's sort of Azure's Azure system there. There's Recognition as well, which is the Amazon platform. So a lot of these are links out to these big cloud platforms for doing it, and they use huge amounts of compute to actually generate these answers and things, and they have very sophisticated, very clever algorithms for doing this. We were using it for business cards, for example. You can take a photo of a business card, throw it into the Azure Compute Vision, and it gives you back all of the information about that business card and things, and sends that person an email to say, thank you for getting in contact with us and things. There's some very clever algorithms there that you can start to integrate into. See, Pictera is doing this. They're looking for images or buildings coming from satellite data, air, and increasingly drone type data sets as well. And they're also now starting to look for cracks in intersections where you've got railroad ties, new construction coming in, looking for solar panels and things. So you've got white lines. Are your road markings, for example, starting to degrade? Are they breaking up? Have you got cracks on the road coming through? So you can start to maybe use the FME process to say, well, I want to check these particular areas or these particular roads, push that information up to these platforms. They can take the latest drone imagery, the latest aerial imagery, do all that analysis and then push that back, which you could then push into something like Maximo workflow order system to actually then generate the workflow outputs the other side. So still probably quite early, but there's an awful lot of potential going forwards here. And there's also things like on the text side. So you've got Google Natural Language, the Azure Text Analytics. FME has the NLPT trainer and NLP classifier that you can start to put text through, so you can say if stuff looks positive or negative and things as part of your workflow. So that's kind of a real whistle-stop tour of what's there in 2020. There's a lot of different things. Certainly on the server side, there's some quite exciting improvements, I think. There, on the desktop side, it's probably performance. 2020 is a lot faster. And let's say, if you ever want more information, then obviously there's the Knowledge Center. Would always encourage people to go towards the FME community. There is articles there, for example, on how to create the server app. So reach out to us, or there's some good article there to go through. And there's also the hub. So there's a lot of transformers, templates, and things up there as well. If you just go to hub.safe.com, you'll find through. And also there's the World Tour still, October. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming in the .1 release. We've seen some of the developments that they're doing for that. So there is still more coming this year. So there's definitely going to be a lot more to talk about in October as well. So definitely come back and get in touch with us for that one. And also, SAFE have moved away from doing their own world tour this year to a virtual one. So if you are stuck at home, want to find out a little bit more about what SAFE have been doing, some of their customers have been doing as well. If you go to safe.com/world tour, you can sign up, and they're doing a virtual roadshow as well. So you can sit through that one and see what they've been doing.
I think that'll actually be really good. The virtual world tour, I think it will be fun if you have the time. I think it's 3-hour sessions, I think, each day, but I think it will. There's always some great content in it, and obviously we're all devastated that there's no world tour this year, but yeah, no, I think it'll be worthwhile in terms of from some SAFE. We'll obviously have ours at the end of the year, so it's kind of something to kind of block up the summer. You there, Gavin? Or did we lose you?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, no, I was going to say, it's a good chance as well to see what a lot of customers are doing there, especially in this, the US. It tends to be a little bit more US focused, the Safe one, just because that's essentially where they go out, because the partners do the rest of the globe. But they have a lot of very good use cases. And actually what you find is that what organizations do globally is all very, very similar. You know, local governments battling the same problems, whether you're in Ireland, the UK, France, Germany, America and things. So it's a very good chance to get a lot of ideas and things, and to think, oh, I'd never thought of doing that, or I'd never thought of using that transformer in that particular way and things as part of that process.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time, Gavin, and there's a couple of questions which I'm going to fly through really quickly. Actually, the first one's for me. Can you have a trial of FME Cloud? You can. FME Cloud, you can actually just go to the link on the IMGS website and you get $250. There's also asked about Snowflake. Again, same for Snowflake. There is a trial available and they give you $400. Again, you can get it to our website or just pop me an email and I can set all that kind of stuff up for you. No problems whatsoever. Someone wanted to know, do you have a rough idea of when in the summer the release of FME Server 20.1 was going to come out? I know it's funny time.
Yeah, it was originally scheduled, I think, back end of July, early August, because it was going to come off the back of their international user conference in June. It will probably still be the same time. We've not heard that it's going to move at all at the moment. And actually, in theory, because they aren't going ahead with the international user conference, they've actually got more time to focus on it.
Brilliant. Lovely. Another one, does Safe provide a Kubernetes container ready to go?
Ooh, yes, I think they do. But if you're interested, get in touch with us. Okay,
perfect. Lovely. You heard it here first from Gavin, and I get in touch with Gavin, not me on that one. The idea of all the Kubernetes and the containerization, but yeah, you're my resident expert. Could a webhook take the user location information from a mobile device?
If the mobile device can send the information, so webhooks are basically a way of receiving information. So if you have a device or an app on your mobile phone that can push information out that would include location, then yes. And it's certainly possible. We've done a number of different rollouts with that in the past.
Brilliant. Can you expand on connectivity with Archis Pro?
Ooh.
Take that offline in terms we wouldn't have the time for that, but we can maybe pull out a few bits as part of the release of what's
yeah.
Pro on the new 2020.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how much is new beyond the fact I know there's a lot on the utility network side. So there's a lot of integrations there around actually making that process easier with some of the templates and things that Safe have been adding in and making sure it pulls the right information in as well when it's reading those models.
Paul, I'll pop you an email afterwards directly on that and we can catch up. Yeah, so guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks. We went a little bit over time. I guess when we were running through it, we were trying to give it enough time, but there was so much content, so much rich content. You don't realize how much is in these releases. We will have the World Tour, as Gavin already mentioned, later in the year anyway, so definitely come along and we'll be able to kind of show you these, hopefully in best practice, because people will be using the technology already. Again, if you need support with upgrading, I know last year I think we probably did 90% of the servers in the country. I think we supported with the upgrades. So again, in the summer when that comes around, if you want some help, let us know. Gavin and Ryan and Zubair are always on hand to give you guys a dig out. And yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll send out the slides and the recording later on tomorrow. So if you want to share it with one of your colleagues that couldn't make it today, I know everybody's very busy. Thank you. Thanks, Tanya, for all the support in the background. It doesn't happen without you. You're very quiet, our unsung hero in the background. And Gavin, obviously, always. Thanks a million. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.